Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, premièrement, bienvenue à tous, and thank you, David Renwick, for your precision timing on the handoff. As you very rightly introduced, we're going to have our first very rapid-fire Oxford debate, for which purpose I would respectfully invite to the podium our contenders, Mark McElwain, who will be speaking for the affirmative, and Jill Donoghue, who will be speaking for the negative. And Mitch, what slides have we got up for us to begin with? Now, just before beginning, I'd like to, of course, thank Joe Nott and Mitch Shannon for their annual invitation to join you at, I think, what is a very important industry conference, National Pharmaceutical Congress. And I have the opportunity of working with a number of your divisions in the CME capacity, but I'm happy to allow other folks to do the heavy lifting. And I wanted to just add very briefly, because I was inspired by the initial talk with regard to government relations. We were asking a deputy minister who will remain nameless why there's so much policy without evidence and so much evidence that has no policy attached to it. And their response, which was very telling, I think, was that, well, for elected officials, evidence is what their constituents come and tell them. So I thought it was very telling. In any case, we'll begin. Now, I'd invite you to be adequately caffeinated as I just read this particular resolution, which emanated from a New York Times article published in January, and I might even have to read this twice, but basically it is this. Resolved, this House supports the establishment of a National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences funded by the U.S. government to speed the development of new drugs by conducting early-stage research that the pharmaceutical industry is unable or unwilling to perform. Kind of like a drug delivery device, unable or unwilling to perform. Now, this is probably a fairly radical idea, and as it says quite rightly, for the affirmative, Mark McElwain, and perhaps an ideal opportunity to introduce him. Mark, as many of you will know, is Vice President of Account Services at KPSP communications firm. He's worked with PAB, he's worked with government, a number of degrees to his credit. I think his initial incarnation was as a health economist. And of course, no stranger to this particular podium. For the negative, we have Jill Donoghue, who is the author of Persuasion RX, How to Influence Ethically. She runs a number of seminars, particularly for the pharma world. In particular, her very well-received presentation, which I understand is the most popular course at CCPE functions, Are You an Influencer? How to Influence in Pharma. And I might also just mention, if I can, with your permission, before this debate and to the lead-up, there was an extraordinary exchange of probably fairly aggressive and nasty emails, but I am pleased to tell you we are all speaking to each other, and perhaps more importantly, still speaking to Mitch Shannon. In any case, back to the quick summary slides, guys. Thank you. Again, slides courtesy of Mitch. I might have altered some of the imagery, but in any case, $45 billion of investment in the pharmaceutical industry, as was mentioned, with some of the anterior preceding presentations, is at 3%, 6%, 9% payback. Basically, what the folks at NIH are saying that, well, if there are certain diseases that are not being addressed, and the following slide will mention, then perhaps government needs to step forward. And I'll let you kind of have a look at some of the other stuff there. Next slide. Next slide. Yes. So areas of stalled development, at least from the government's point of view, obviously some of the burgeoning demographic shift areas, whether it's Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, probably a very long list of neurodegenerative disorders, as essentially attempting to deal with the graying of North America, the demographic aging that, of course, all of us are. Now, the Honorable Dr. Francis Collins, who has a particular gift, I think, for inserting himself into the pharmaceutical world, basically says, very reassuringly, I might add, to Congress, that none of this is intended to be competitive with the private sector. The hope would be that any project reaches the point of commercial appeal, and then, of course, it's hopefully re-adopted by the pharma world. In any case, so the question remains, therefore, with government, the billion-dollar question: can government succeed where private industry has failed? So, to begin with, I will now respectfully invite Mark McElwain, who will have 5 minutes to address us, followed by Jill, 5 minutes, and then 90-second rebuttals. And I think I've got some voting to be executed as well. So let's get to the touchpads, gentlemen. Am I doing it? You're doing it? So we'll have a before and after, and just to let you know, we are quite serious about the prizes for today. So there is a Pharma World Wrestling Champion mixed martial art kind of thing that will be presented at the end. So I would ask you, A, to digest the resolution, and B, to vote on it. So basically, should government get involved where pharma is, quote, unwilling or unable to? And perhaps we can have the vote now. Wow, very nice. That looks like an Ipsos Reid poll with current events. And therefore, our work is cut out. And actually, it's probably good because I'm going to be able to detect any small moves, some sentinel signals. So I invite now Mark to lead us off. 5 minutes, and it will be vigorously enforced timing. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Kadri and to Jill also for agreeing to bat this around. Well, back in February, Mitch sent me the link about this proposal, and I was pretty dubious, too. For some bureaucrat to seriously believe that the way to fix the disappointing flow of FDA drug approvals was to launch another $1 billion federal government institute, well, I was skeptical. But way back in February, I apparently agreed to argue in favor of this motion. So I did some reading. And let's look at 3 reasons to consider it. Now, first, the institute does come with some pedigree. It's funded in President Obama's recent budget, part of initiatives he called our generation's Sputnik moment of a new level of R&D. The idea came from academics studying the drug development process, that our industry's drug discovery business model is broken. Some are disappointed on the slow progress of genomics. The proposal is designed to promote public-private partnerships, with the public sector doing the basic research where there's little incentive, and the private sector doing the commercializing, what it does best. Pharma, the US counterpart of RX&D, says that out of every 5,000 compounds screened for their potential, only 250 make it out of the lab and into animals, and only 1 is approved by the FDA. Says one academic from Tufts University, the industry can no longer afford to develop drugs on its own. Now, second, the proposal is a great way to bring more into the drug discovery tent, to co-opt some critics. Now, for you to support this proposal, you don't have to believe that this new institute will get results in a hurry. That's a stretch. But just imagine the pressure that the leaders of this organization will be under to produce, to generate some advances that hit the market. Suddenly, their goals look more like our goals. I look forward to the hallway chats dealing with their cousins in FDA, navigating little roadblocks like study design and patient recruitment, and maybe even reimbursement. Now, evidence that this proposal might be hitting the mark came when I read that there are left-wing critics who oppose the new institute because it will act too much like a drug company. It's not about pure research. Now, when the loony left is uncomfortable with the proposal, this is something for us to consider. Now, third, we should consider supporting this resolution because this might not be a good issue for the pharma industry to fight. We all have to pick our fights, a bit like issues around the dinner table. While this might not be a proposal that any of us would have hatched, what are the optics of the pharma industry fighting it? That despite the onrushing patent cliff, the industry will be all right with what's in the pipeline? Not at all. At the working level, many of the researchers in early stage development are building partnerships, looking for funding all the time. It will be hard for the industry to stand up and argue that it's bad to have more public attention and funding towards our goal of discovering drugs and bringing them to market. So that's likely why the industry association Pharma came out on February 24th this year with a statement that applauded the government's announcement of what they call a collaborative partnership to speed the transformation of promising lab concepts into actual medications. Now, Pharma may believe that the initiative will be cut down by the Republicans in budget negotiations, but the first verb in Big Pharma's announcement is to applaud the announcement. Okay, we've looked at 3 reasons why the resolution bears your consideration. First, that the proposal's pedigree among those concerned that our industry needs broader sharing of the financial risks of taking basic science all the way to FDA approval. Second, the value in harnessing the energy and ambition of a new constituency towards the goal of drug discovery and commercialization. More advocates. And third, the reality that this proposal may not be a good one for the industry to fight. Who knows how this proposal will eventually turn out, but let's be optimists too. Someday we may look back on this unusual proposal as the time the pendulum started turning back towards a new consensus on the value of drug discovery. A few reasons, Mr. Chairman, to consider supporting the resolution. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark, once again for your precision timing. I think we all heard your heartfelt messaging in there, and as well, thank you for recapitulating some of the excellent vocabulary from the emails exchanged. So, for the negative 5 minutes is Jill Donahue.
Thank you, Dr. Caudry and Mark, and thank you, Mitch, for inviting me here today. Embedded in this resolution, there are 2 issues which I question. Question number 1. Is the pharma industry unable and unwilling to conduct early-stage research? No. It is true that R&D productivity has been declining since 2000 despite doubling our investment in it. We are, however, still creating new clinical entities, but those candidates are not making it through the drug development and approval processes as successfully as they used to. The goal is to create new drugs. Why are we jumping to this expensive solution to sink $1 billion more into a government center? Before we should even think about a solution, we need to identify the problem. So let's unpack the issue. Why aren't NCEs getting through the system to bring new drugs to the public? I'll present just 2 of those reasons today. 1, the reimbursement environment, and 2, the regulatory environment. So let's look at the reimbursement environment. Every year since 2000, governments worldwide have reduced the percentage of drugs that are funded through public reimbursement schemes from about 80% in the 90s to about 25% now. Government only wants to reimburse drugs that offer disruptive rather than incremental innovation. This creates a significant disincentive for pharma companies to pursue incremental advancements. An even bigger problem with this, public drug programs have failed to understand the central role of incremental innovation in medical progress. Progress in the creation of new drugs, or any technology for that matter, almost always comes in small increments. When you compare a new drug to the drug that preceded it, you'll likely find only small differences. But these increments accrue with time in an extremely competitive drug creation ecosystem. Let me illustrate this with a technology that you are all familiar with, the BlackBerry. Imagine that you have in one hand the original BlackBerry developed in 1999. It has a low-resolution screen that can display about 8 lines of text. It can send email, but you can't make a call on it or access the web. So take in the other hand, imagine that you now have the most modern version of this device, the BlackBerry Torch. It has a super clean touch screen, it connects to your email and calendaring system, it takes pictures, plays your music, connects you to your social network, it does everything but make your coffee. These 2 devices are vastly different. However, if you pick any 2 adjacent devices from the continuum of BlackBerries, the differences are much more subtle. Journalists argue, for example, over whether the Torch 2 is any better than the Torch 1. In the same way, our bureaucrats argue whether the latest cholesterol-reducing drug is better than the one that preceded it. The incremental advancements in pharmaceuticals form the lion's share of new drug development, the Me Too category, that is spoken of with derision by critics. These add up to innovation, slowly but surely. However, these are the very innovations that no longer get funding. The bottom line, What happens when we cut out the small, slight, incremental changes, don't fund them, and just wait for the disruptive innovation? Progress halts. Reason number one why NCEs aren't making it through the system. The second reason, regulatory standards for drug approval have escalated dramatically over the past 15 years. If the FDA approves a drug and then adverse reactions surface, they're criticized. If they don't approve a drug and millions die for the lack of it, nobody knows the difference. The government has a strong disincentive to approve any drug, no matter how beneficial. As a result, safety standards have increased dramatically. It would be hard to argue that we should make the safety standards lower. But we must recognize that this is one of the drivers to the problem of developing new drugs. Will passing the job over to the government help this? Not likely. So, when assessing the plan to speed the development of new drugs, we must first identify the problem, that we've crushed incremental innovation by virtue of global regulatory and reimbursement practices. Which brings me to the second question, should this function be assigned to government? No. Can you now see how this solution misses the mark? If most change comes from incremental innovation, which is inhibited by regulatory and reimbursement hoops, how will passing the task of developing drugs to the government help? In closing, in the 200 years since the industry started, the proliferation of new drugs has contributed to the increasing our average lifespan from about 30 years to 80, giving us each on average about 50 years more life to enjoy. I'd say we've done an admirable job. Assigning the development of drugs to the government is not a good idea. Rather, what the government should be looking at is how to change the environment so that we, the experts in drug development, can continue to do what we do best, develop life-saving, life-sustaining, life-improving drugs. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, for your very thoughtful remarks and for the complete absence of negative campaigning and character assassination. 90 seconds, Mark.
Thanks, Jill. Well, but let's not lose sight that our industry today is on an unsustainable path. We got to do something. The Lancet reports that at the industry's peak, which apparently was in 1996, the FDA approved close to 50 new molecular entities. But for several years, that average number has come down to 20. And some say we could see those numbers fall further. And we see evidence of the retrenchment all around us, even in fewer conferences like this. But more seriously, in this proposal, those involved in basic research are looking for ways to keep the good ideas alive, to share the financial risks of taking basic science all the way to market. Now, Jill talked about the regulatory barriers, but let's face it, there are no magic solutions in how the FDA is going to work. David described the many pressures that bureaucrats are under. Sometimes I'm amazed at how chaotic the American system is, how polarized their debate is, and how enormous their deficit is now. I think most of us in this room can be glad that Canadians, we don't have to pay for this proposal. But there is a possibility that in a few years we'll look back at this proposal as having improved the environment for drug discovery. One more reason, Mr. Chairman, to vote yes. Thanks.
I agree, Mark, there's a problem. However, the likelihood that the government will save the day is flawed because the true barriers, regulation and reimbursement, are still there. If someday the government's National Center does come up with something interesting, they will find out how the FDA is a prison house for new therapeutics, keeping them shackled in the dark. Supporting the establishment of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences is a perfect example of applying a solution to a problem without identifying the true cause of that problem. The result, they'll spend a lot more to get a lot less. I picture a basketball scenario. The team is having trouble scoring. Pass it to the tall guy, they cheer. However, one keen observer assesses the situation and realizes that the hoop is square and the ball is round. Will it help to pass it to the taller guy? No, we need to change that hoop. And changing the hoop, or in this case, changing the environment, isn't that what government does best? Isn't that what they should be focusing on? Changing the regulatory and reimbursement environments. Think for a moment, have you ever seen a government successfully score and develop a product? This is the model that failed in Soviet Union, defeated by consensus of world economies. The job of government is to create environments, not get into the business. They should be asking themselves, what can we do to create the environment conducive to incremental innovation, not get into the business of developing drugs?
Thanks very much, Jill. We'll proceed to the vote before any further comments. So once again, the resolution, as you've seen, does this House support the government's initiative for the pharmaceutical industry when it's unable or unwilling to perform drug discovery in the early stages? Yay. Or
I was speeding down the avenue, the light turned red and I drove through. Up came a policeman dressed in blue. Hello there. Hello there. It was then I found I never pays. I heard the judge say...
Oh my goodness. Now, just to recap for us all, as you'll remember, the for and against initially was 47% to 53%. And Jill, the cogency of your remarks has, I think, convinced everyone in this hall, or a number of folks, and I'm honored now to present to you the National Pharmaceutical Congress Mixed Martial Arts Presentation Award here. I'm just directing Jill that she must actually shake hands as part of protocol with Mark. It's a fascinating article, and either myself or Mitch, if you contact us, would be pleased to get it to you. As I say, in the New York Times Federal Research Center will help develop medicines. You'll also be pleased to know that the FDA is, I think, creating a division which will assist pharma with the regulation of their social media interactions as well. So I think we have a lot of time for questions, or no, Mitch is giving me the evil eye, so therefore we have no time for questions. So I think we now have a nutritional break, which will possibly actually be nutritional. So thank you very much for your attention.